I was going through my bins of junk cars that I have sitting around and found these two Hot Wheels jet threats. These are obviously kid painted. Had to be the same kid. Notice there's gold on each of them. The purple is a really heavy, I'm guessing, fingernail polish coat. And that's the one I decided to work on. Being cheap as I am, I only wanted to get one replacement glass right now. So I did that and I decided the purple one would be the one to go in the stripper. So I started taking it apart and I needed to use the hole punch because the rivets on this, being an earlier car, the rivets are really small. I did use the shielded drilling bit, one of the Vicks bits that you hear Paul over at Fat Guy Productions mention all the time. They work perfect for this kind of thing. The front post is actually through the engine. The engine makes up that front half, pretty much keeps the car together. There is a back post under the seat. That post is so short, I decided not to try drilling and tapping it. I only drilled and tapped the motor itself. I used that to hold this together in the end, with a little bit of help. The wheels, those are red lines that I had to take off of there. So I fought getting the axles out. I shouldn't have. I should have just cut through that area that holds the axle in place, but nah, not me. I had to fight it. And they didn't come out as easily as I had hoped, but they came out. After stripping the paint and polishing up the body a little bit, you see I was looking for the flaws, and there is a flaw, a bad dent in that back wing area, and there were a couple other spots. So I hit those with Bondo spot putty, and then proceeded to sand them down. I'm not going for a Spectraflame type paint job on this. Looking at the Hot Wheels wiki, basically a lot of these, if not all, were solid colors. They weren't Spectraflame paint. These particular ones, both have the newer style engine. The earlier ones had an engine panel that would flip up, and neither of these were that. Yeah, you do now see a Band-Aid on my finger. I ran into a few difficulties, but did not drill into my finger. Don't worry about that. No, that didn't happen. But I did drill and tap the post on that engine. Like I said before, it's an exceptionally small post. It did not, it was too small to handle a 256 screw. So I used the smaller 172 screw on that. It seems like you do end up using those often. I love the Testors Extreme Lacquer paints. This one's Deja Blue for the color. And then I went over it with the Wet Look Clear. And these are tough to beat. And there isn't a primer coat. That Deja Blue actually it's paint and primer all in one is what they say. And it actually does work well. There were also some rough spots on the base, particularly around those exhaust pipes. So what I ended up doing is just sanding them down until I got past the rough spots. So they're not quite as deep as they originally were, but I didn't have to take that much off of them. All in all, it wasn't too bad. I did cut up some Q-tips because I needed some small polishing tips for the Dremel. I have a chuck on the end of my Dremel, so I'm just able to clamp down on those. And they work pretty darn well, and they're really cheap. So after polishing both that engine section and the base with flits using the Dremel tool, I went over it with the Renaissance wax to kind of seal it. And the Renaissance wax is interesting because it also kind of cleans up any of the flits residue that's still in there. It's almost like an additional cleaning step. And then I put an extra coat of this Renaissance wax on it. And again, that's something else I picked up from Paul over at Fat Guy Productions. So there's a couple things in this video alone. So anyhow, but they work well. And this Ren wax does really help seal in that polishing that you've given it. I didn't want to put a clear coat on the base or the engine for that matter to seal it. So I just went over it with the Rinwax. Then I had to make up some new red lines for it. So what I did is I used the bearings that I've mentioned before in my videos, and I do have a link on the Thingiverse site to these bearings. And I did do a short video about it. I just used those bearings, and I used the bearing style wheels that I picked up from Bright Vision. It's really simple, just using straight pins for the axles. You just cut them down to size. The straight pins are also usually a softer metal, so they're easier to crimp than, say, regular piano wire kind of thing that you would use and try and crimp down on. Some of the other, like from K&S, if you were to buy something from them, often that's a lot tougher to crimp than just some simple straight pins. So it's actually a pretty easy process, and it's a great way to replace red lines, to convert other cars to red lines. I just did a bone shaker video where I converted it over to red lines and used the same exact process. Those are fence pliers that I used to crimp it, and poof, yep, shot that axle off. So that's the only thing. You're trying to crimp almost as little as possible of the axle, but yet have it flare out. And when you do that in the pliers, sometimes they'll just take off on you. But then I just use pliers, push them down into the wheels. And since I'm able to just drop them into that groove where the axle was, it makes it a lot easier to install them. Yeah, but I can bumble and fumble here a little bit doing these things. So be patient. I'll get there. I love the look of red lines on so many different castings. And this originally being a red line, naturally, I was going to use red lines on it. They aren't the exact same red lines that the original had, because the original had where the axle goes through the entire wheel. And that's not what I wanted to do on this. So then it's just a matter of dropping those in place. And I just put a little touch of CA glue to keep them from lifting out of the groove. It's not like I really glued the axle solidly in place. I just used it to kind of dome over those little flanges, or whatever you want to call them, that typically hold the axle in place. I did get a replacement glass from Second Chance Redlines. And you don't realize how tiny some of this stuff is until you start bumbling and fumbling around with it, and the glass was no exception to that. I really do love how that Deja Blue paint, and the Wet Look Clear Extreme Lacquers worked on this. I couldn't have been any happier with the look of that. And so I finally got the glass in place. And it works really well. And now I know I'm going to buy another glass for the other one at some point and do something with it. I have something in mind for that other one. It's not going to be a restoration. At least I'm not planning for it to be. I have something a little different. Like I said before, the post on the engine is what I'm using to hold this together. It holds the front half of the vehicle together. It's designed to do that. And what I ended up doing on the back post, just to kind of give it a little more reinforcement off camera, I just put a little dot of CA glue there. It's not that it really needed it, but it helped. So there's where we started. Again, the purple one is the one I chose. Naturally, it was the one with the more screwed up rear wing area. I hadn't paid much attention to that when I was making the choice. But I think it turned out well. The spot putty filled the imperfections in. And here's where it ended up. I really like this color. This is not a color that it was originally available in, but I think it really looks good on this casting. And the blue glass, it seemed like a natural color to go with. I was able to polish out those exhausts on the back with those Q-tips that I had thrown in the Dremel that I mentioned before. But there you have it. I hope you like this build. I have some glamour shots coming up here in a second. And I think for a Rattlecan Redline restoration, this isn't too shabby. Thanks for watching. Everybody stay safe and healthy out there. Thanks also to my Patreon supporters for all of their help. And catch y'all in the next one.